Hi, I'm Elise Winnick, Director of Arts and Culture at the Vilnius Shul. Thanks for joining us today on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. Today is the 81st anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. The Vilna is housed in Boston's last remaining immigrant-era synagogue building, and today serves as a vibrant center for Jewish arts and culture for Boston and the greater community. We're here today with Sam Bak to remember. Sam is an artist who now is based in Boston, but has journeyed from Vilna through Germany to Israel and beyond. And his work tells the story of his extraordinary survival and the hope that he has for all of us in the wake of the tragedies of the past. Sam, why don't we start by talking a bit about your life growing up in Vilna, what your childhood was like, and what it meant for you to be part of the amazing city that Vilna was at the time.
Well, first of all, let me tell you how moving it is for me to think that I'm speaking in the Vilna Shul, for the Vilna Shul. First of all, in Yiddish, shul means school, very simple. And this is what Jews usually do when they go to a cultural center or the synagogue. And then to think that this little boy from Vilna, for whom Boston was I think, because I was very interested in geography, existed in England, but did not exist beyond the ocean, will end up one day speaking in a school or in a synagogue created by Jews from Vilna. I mean, this alone is something which is beyond human imagination, that such things happen. And of course, and when the incredible happens, and to me, incredible things have happened by the dozens. Of course, there is hope. There is hope because we can say, and it was demonstrated, the impossible can always become possible. So I was born the first son of my parents, the first grandson of grandparents who were also friends between themselves. Already with a certain gene for the manipulation of grandparents. And they tried to make for me the most wonderful, wonderful paradise on earth, while they were very worried about what was going on, because I was born in 1933. Hitler was at that year in power on the border of Poland, with an enormous appetite to eat it up. And I had no idea of it. I had no idea of it. My life was our big dog that was turning over furniture at home, our cat that was going out for all kinds of things that I did not understand that he was looking for. And then when the war started, it was fantastic because the Russians arrived, took away the apartment of my mother's parents, and the big aquarium that I always wanted came to our house. And my grandparents, now all of the four of them lived in one apartment. And we had all these people from Warsaw that were waiting for some visas that a certain Japanese consul had to give them. And they were telling interesting stories, and there were always those dinners at table with many people, and people screaming at each other, you're an idiot, you're this, and then laughing together. And so it was interesting. And then, of course, suddenly the Lithuanian police came and threw us out. My father disappeared. He was in a camp and in the ghetto. And what can I say? But I think that he turned me today into one of those unique beings. I'm almost like a polar bear. disappearing little by little, with a memory of before the war, and after the war. And I think it is a unique experience to have accumulated all these memories of various times, of very different forms of human behavior, and trying to make a sense of it. I mean, a lot of it is like finding a sense in a successful lottery ticket that you buy. But I think that my life on the whole was a very successful lottery ticket.
How do you think painting helped you in that transition into the ghetto? You said your first exhibition was already when you were 8 years old. So the painting must have been a big piece of your life.
I mean, I was never faced with the dilemma of painting or not painting, thinking about what painting does for me, because, as people were saying, I was born with a brush in my hand. I mean, it was not always easy. In the very beginning, I was told, never on the furniture, never on the wall. We give you paper, you can paint on this. So then I understood the limitations of an artist. But then I understood that I'm celebrated. I'm being celebrated. I am shown, look at what he has done, and this. And my grandmother was so proud, sent to her famous brother in Berlin, who was there, the famous man, Arno Nadel. I'm still dealing with things today of the inheritance of Arno Nadel in the Jewish Museum of Berlin, but it's a separate story. But he wrote an order, Kunst, Kunst und Kunst, only art, art and art for this boy. Don't bother him with anything else. I must have been 4 or 5. But it is strange how this order penetrated into my parents. Even in the wartime, even in the ghetto, the first thing was to look for paper, to look for pencils, to look for color. I mean, I never asked myself, I mean, I was a painter. I mean, I used to breathe and I used to paint. Mm-hmm. So this is what I was doing. This is what I started to want to do because I was doing it. And this is what I today think is an extraordinary thing that helped me so much in my life. That helped me to, when I arrived here to Boston, I met Larry Langer. Larry Langer wrote about survivors and how they dealt with surviving with the various traumas and so on. I said, you were lucky. He said, you could simply paint and you would solve all your traumas with your brushes and your pencils. And to some degree, I think it might have been of help, but I think it is also simply trying to understand the enormous complexity of life, of what it meant to have gone through the inferno of the Holocaust, which I wasn't able to understand when I was a child, when I was 10, or even when I was 15, and I was already brought to Israel, and I was supposed to become normal. Short pants, khaki color, try to lose my Yiddish accent, which I never lost in any language, and become somehow like all the others. No, I never became like all the others. But I was observing people because I lived among Holocaust survivors. And I realized that there is not a single story that is similar to another story. Every Holocaust survivor is a separate story. There is no fiddler on the roof among the survivors. And how they dealt with it, and how after the war, so many survivors were very ambitious, very successful businessmen. When I was in New York, I was living in New York in 75, 74, I think. There was a Congress of psychiatrists who were examining the question, why do so many very successful Holocaust survivors commit suicide? This was the subject. And it was really happening. People that survived the Holocaust, that after that, some of them became very energetic entrepreneurs. And suddenly, when they arrived at an age in which they could not anymore do that, so that suddenly the means with which they overcame their trauma were gone, and they disintegrated in themselves and decided to finish their lives. And there were many others who kept it a secret. They wanted to have children. They wanted their children to be normal. So they never talked to them. They kept it a secret. They didn't know that they were producing a second generation. It was complicated, neurotic, and was making their own children pay the guilt of the grandparents. So, I mean, there were so many different ways, and I was able to observe all that. I was able to observe all that because of the many survivors that surrounded my life when I was in Israel in the years before I left for Paris. And even then later on, I was always somehow in touch with survivors because survivors were looking for me. And I was being asked to be kind of a representative on the day of the Holocaust in Israel. My girls in school were always saying, "Oh, today Daddy will speak on the radio." Because I was one of the only survivors who was always interviewed because I could speak about it and I could speak freely, and people enjoyed sometimes listen to my controversial stories and so. So painting, you know, I did not answer directly to your question because painting is part of it. It's all integrated into a real web of existence, and most probably my great uncle was somehow right to some degree. There was a little bit of talent also involved in all that, and art was important. Although socially, I realized very often how much art is an incredible luxury, and and it only can be considered after you had your bread and butter on the table.
But you could. And are there any pieces of work that you did, any paintings that you did when you were in the ghetto that you're particularly
Yes, some
tied to?
works, actually some works survived. The poet Sutskever, who took a great interest in the boy, not called then Sam or Samuel, called Samek. And Sutskever turned this Samek, he wanted to make of this Samek a Jewish-sounding name, so he decided that Samek is Zalman. And he wrote about the Zalman in his first book on the memories of the ghetto, about this incredibly gifted child, Zalman, who by now must be dead, and so on. He wrote it in 1944, when he was working on the Black Book of Ehrenburg and Grossman. And then actually he and Kaczergiński buried some of my drawings that were in the ghetto exhibition, or maybe not in the exhibition that I just gave him, or that he took, I don't know. And they were in the courtyard of the Strashun Library that they have then found and decided to create with these findings the beginning of a Jewish museum in Vilna. So actually it was under the Soviets that Kaczerginsky and Sutskever started a Jewish museum in Vilna. Today the Jewish museum exists, and the building is called the Samuel Bak Museum. It's all so incredible. But they found these things, and they are today part of my collection of works. And there are two books, beautiful books. One called Samuel Bak, The Art of, and one called Samuelis Bakas, because this is how I become in Lithuanian. And it is absolutely incredible. The Lithuanian authorities gave me so much attention and honor, and I became the honorary citizen of Vilna. Can you imagine? And there was this very tall Lord Mayor of Vilna who gave me this honor, and I was to speak like that, but I was able to say, I said, together with me, there are another 80,000 Jews here with me, standing and accepting this honor. And this is how it was. I mean, Vilna's Jewish population had maybe the largest number of victims in the Holocaust. Only 4.5% of Jews of the Vilna community survived. Can you imagine? It's just unbelievable. I remember when we came out from our hiding in Vilna. In the beginning, we were about 200 people of the whole community. And then little by little, some people arrived. And then we were about maybe 1,500. And later on, they counted about a little over 2,000 who survived. And this was of a community of 70 or 80,000 people. So the chances of surviving were minimal. And how this happened, that with my mother, we went through this chain of events and were able then to get out from the Russian territory, where I was to be taken away from my mother and sent to a school somewhere in Russia for geniuses. Can you imagine? A school for geniuses is a terrible idea. And then going through Germany, post-war Germany, with a Russian zone, with a French zone, with a British zone, and then arriving to the DP camp. And then having a mother who was a good-looking woman. And she interested Mr. Markovsky, who was then in the administration. And she saw this lovely woman and a nice boy, and he became my stepfather. And again, he was a very respected man. So when we were in Israel, all the intellectuals of the pre-war Jewish cultural life were kind of very often meeting in our house. So when I was, as a young man, able to listen to and be nourished by people of really great cultural understanding of things, I was very lucky. I was very lucky.
Is there any story in particular from that time that stands out for you?
Yes, I mean, there are many stories, but there is one, I think, which is beyond a story. It's just a representation of what has happened in many cases of Jewish life. You know, when my mother went to her kindergarten. She was the first year of school. There were not kindergartens then. First year of school, she told me. She came to the school, and there was a little girl standing there, and she came over to my mother. My mother was 6 or 7 years of age, and she said to her, "Do you want to be my best friend?" And she said, my name is Manya. And my mother said, "Yes." Manya didn't know that she has to do with somebody who is going to be the future queen of the class. It was my mother. She was always the queen of the class. Wherever she was, she always became the queen of the class. So when I was born, Manya's son was born. And I was given the name of my great-grandfather, who just died 2 days or 3 days before I was born. He was called Shmuel, so I was called Samek. And then Manya's boy was born, and obviously he was also called Samek because Manya was trying to adapt. And then, of course, we were to be the best friends. And we grew up together like almost two brothers, Samek. And when I was taken to the ghetto with my mother, Samek was hidden by the nanny that they had, a Christian woman. And my mother saw that Manya was so lucky that she was able to hide her boy. But the neighbors of that nanny gave away her and Samek, and the Germans arrived. The boy was killed on the staircase, left in his blood on the staircase with an order not to move his body, so that all the people of the house will know what happens to Jewish children and what will happen to them if they hide any Jews. So this was Samek. Manya was in a state of trauma. But she survived and lived in the next house to ours in Israel in 49. And she had a daughter. And Manya did all the wrong things that can be done to a child because she wanted so much to preserve the child from any bacteria, from any danger, or anything, to such a degree that the psychiatrist who later dealt with that girl gave her an order never to meet her mother, never to have any contact with her mother, because otherwise she and her mother will end their lives. It was an incredible tragedy, this kind of the surviving of Samek's soul in his sister, in a person that was so destroyed by the experience of the Holocaust and the loss of her child that she wasn't capable of having another child and bringing it up as a well-balanced human being. So, you asked me what I remember from that. That is a story that you can multiply by thousands. Maybe not to the same degree of neurosis, but it's the problem of the second generation, the problem of the third generation, of the survivors of the Holocaust. I don't think that this little girl ever knew that she had a brother before. I was not even capable of or had the right to tell her anything. I must say, already I was 8 or 7. I was told, now you stop being a child. We don't have any more the freedom of letting you live as a child. You will live now as a grown-up. Because when it means to be, you are quiet. When it means you don't move, you don't move. When you are told jump, you jump. You don't have the privileges of a child anymore. And then I was 10, and my mother says, "What are you reading with this?" He says, "You have now to stop reading books for children. You read books for adults." Okay, what books should I read? Only books that were written by Nobel Prize writers. And if it's not a Nobel Prize writer, you ask me first. Okay, so I started with Quo Vadis of Sienkiewicz. But I was always, if this night I did not sleep well, it's because I was reading until 1 o'clock in the morning. So I was always a very thirsty reader, because I felt that reading is a possibility of living more lives than just one. So I think that the reading and learning, and really learning what has happened to so many people, I remember we arrived to Germany, and my mother told me, "You must read the 40 Days of Musa Dag." Okay. And this is the tragedy of the Armenians, the terrible Holocaust of the Armenians, who lost over 1 million of their people. Turkey doesn't till this very day acknowledge it. So already at that very early age, I was 13 when I read that, I understood that horrible things have not only happened to Jews, that they were happening, that they are part of the human nature in its most primitive terms of existence, to punish the other, to I don't know, build your own identity by the rejection of the other, instead of finding a way of communicating with the other and arriving to the I and thou of Martin Buber.
You actually were giving, I think, a really powerful foundation for your ability to see that every life experience is its own narrative, right? And it doesn't mean that everything is different from everything else, but to be able to appreciate the unique value of each individual person's story.
Absolutely. I consider myself a religious atheist.
What does it mean to be a religious atheist?
It is to be an atheist with an enormous fear of God. It means, I don't believe in God, but I believe that men, in the name of God, can do the worst atrocities. So I am afraid of people who have the absolute truth in their hands. This is why I'm saying I'm an atheist. I think that even if God existed, he shouldn't be acknowledged, because he doesn't bring any help to people's existence beyond creating rituals and so on, some straitjackets of behavior. So this is I'm sorry, I am surely stepping on the sensitivities of many people when I say that. But this is how I am. This is how I was already when at age 13, I refused to have bar mitzvah. I told my mother, "You want me to have bar mitzvah? Okay, I'll have bar mitzvah, but on condition that God comes and on his knees," because then I believed in God, and I imagined God as, an old man, a Renaissance robe, a big, beautiful white beard that he takes off before he goes to sleep. And I said, God comes and on his knees, he asks for my forgiveness, what he allowed to do to my father, to my grandparents, to my friend Samek. And I refused to have bar mitzvah, because this would have been a religious acknowledgement of somebody.
It's hard to live in a culture that's both governed by a system, a religious system, but also to see how it gets misused.
Absolutely, you're right. And then I know. I mean, I know how much Judaism has humanity. I mean, if you read the Bible, you learn already that income tax is indispensable for the existence of a community. That you have to take care of the widow, and you have to take care of yes, of course. I mean, I am absolutely aware of all that. I think the Bible is an extraordinary book of the rabbinical censorship of ancient texts. It's certainly not. I mean, books written over 500 or 600 years, but went through rabbinical. And when I studied the Bible, I remember in a secular school in Israel, we were told, the Bible in the very beginning was one sentence. From the beginning to the end, the words were not separated. So when they started to cut up the words, since vowels did not exist, they were never sure. Mm-hmm. So sometimes they decided. So there are some words that are known, that exist in Hebrew, that are very known words, mm-hmm. but actually they are born from mistakes. Oh, yeah. Yeah? For instance, the word alken, which means therefore, mm-hmm. was a mistake of some wrong cutting up. So, I mean, is when you can study this fantastic thing of the Jewish culture, which is the Bible, not in the awe of something that you have received from a divinity, but by something created by man. You say, it's extraordinary.
Who's your favorite character in the Bible?
My favorite, you're asking now an egomanic artist, is the prophet Samuel.
Okay. Not just because he's your namesake.
No. But because when the Jews asked for a king, mm-hmm. he refused. Right. I think this is the most extraordinary thing, the refusal of Big Daddy. Mm-hmm. He knew that one day the Americans will have to face presidents who are a Big Daddy.
He was a prophet.
He was a prophet, yeah. This is how it goes.
I want to come back to your journey for a minute. Let's see. Russian, Polish,
yeah.
Yiddish, Hebrew. How many languages?
Before that I learned German.
Okay.
I arrived to Germany and I had the German teachers and I learned German and I read a lot in German.
You have one more language, right? Because painting is a language for you also.
Oh, absolutely. Painting is an extraordinary language because you can hide and say the same time the same things. You don't have to put them in a closet. Mm-hmm. You let the interpreters reveal something not about what you have done, but about who they are. So, yeah, painting is a fantastic language. It's an extraordinary journey. Every painting is a journey into a blank canvas. And you go there and you find there a little bit of yourself, a lot of others from whom you have taken, legally or illegally, artists are big thieves. And then it says something to others. And when you discover that it says something to others, it's an incredible sense of communicating. Yeah, it's a real gift. It's a real gift, and I must say that when I moved away from, I love my abstract things that I did when I was younger. Since 50 years, I'm using the language that I'm using now till this very day, and I'm not trying to change it. Uh, but I think that I arrived to a sphere of narrative art. There is abstract art. I arrived to a sphere of narrative art. And when I was a young artist, there was art, the true art, and there was the second-rated art, illustration. And I was asking people, so who is the most important illustrator of the Bible? They didn't have an. I was saying, of course, it's Michelangelo. Isn't he a great artist? Oh, yes, yeah, that's true, maybe. And Michelangelo did narrative art. I mean, he told the Bible to people who didn't know how to read. And he told them, just look to the sky and you will see on the ceiling all the things that have happened from creation to... So later on, I thought, oh, God and Adam and the two fingers that meet, let me take it from there. And only the finger of God I painted as a cutout of wood that hangs on the wall. It's a language that can be reinvented by so many artists. In some way, I must say that painting is somehow close to German, because in German you can invent words that everybody will understand, and it's never existed before. You stick together several words, and they become one word. And so in painting you can tell many things. And I am fascinated by reading. There are some beautiful texts about my paintings that are beautiful by themselves. And knowing that they have inspired people to speak like that is already extraordinary. Even if I did not even dare to think what they are saying. Mm-hmm. And I only hope, I say, this is not me, this is my superego. It's created.
Well, and your painting has really provided an access point for so many people to learn about and deepen their understanding of the Holocaust, for people who don't, even for people who carry that heritage themselves, but all the more so for people who don't,
yes.
That your imagery is really an access point in a way that is perhaps less overwhelming than documentary footage or photos, that to really be able to draw someone into your experience so that they can feel a sense of just the power and the magnitude and the horror of that time.
You're right, but it always needs communicators. Mm-hmm. This is why I'm so grateful for all the people that write about my art, that take care of my art in the museums that are dedicated to it, because they are the bridge between my art and the public. Mm-hmm. I am telling actually of a world that exists after an immense catastrophe. Very often my still lifes are made out of patched up things. And this is because I had always a sense of living in a patched up world. And not only of the Jewish existence, but a patched up world on the whole. I mean, very often the past is romanticized, is glorified, and never understood to what it was. Very often when you tell a story, you have to start it with an insignificant or almost insignificant detail that brings in the reader. And when you got the reader, then you tell him whatever happened. And my work somehow depends on people who help. So I'm enormously grateful to them. And this is why somebody, for instance, like Larry Langer, who saw my work in a certain in a certain perspective of his, but he was so helpful. And this is why facing history was for me so helpful, because they told me, yes, your work helps us bring people to very difficult subjects. If we show them the photographs of Auschwitz or the photographs of Bergen-Belsen, they will reject it immediately, but we show them something with fantasy, and then they say, you know, these things have a reason to exist because there was once a world, and then even the people who survived try to build it back, but it never was as ideal as it could have been imagined or whatever, and this kind of bricolage of things of the past is what we live with. And then I also understood that this is part of the human condition. Look at what memory is. Memory is not a folder that pops up on your screen. Memory is always a recreation. And you remember things differently in different ages, according to things that have more meaning or less meaning, sometimes from what you have learned about the circumstances of what has happened in the past or whatever. So it always changes. Memory always changes. And the collective memory, history, my goodness, this changes enormously according to the needs of the people who publish history. So you have all in every generation, you have people who write history and you have people who publish history, and they are not the same people. The history that is published is always controlled by given interests. People who write history are very much maybe controlled by human decency. I would hope so. Well, it's actually, I think that my painting on the whole, for me personally, I think it has something to do with the human condition. On the whole, with the human condition. For me, even the Holocaust in itself is a kind of extreme laboratory of the human condition. It has taught me of what man is capable of. Men born in a certain place at a certain time, in a certain culture, with the same givings, can become this or that. So where do we end up with all this? I don't know.
Well, you talked about memory, and I think that's an important place for us to come to, both in terms of the way memory is informed by the human condition and the individual narratives, and how the same two people can remember the same moment differently in their own narrative, and that your painting also serves as a form of remembering. So what I'd love for us to do now is if we could light the memorial candle, and if you would just say a little bit about the people who you want us to remember with you. Could we do that?
Oh, yes. It's an enormous honor for me to do something like that. I mean, as they say in Hebrew, katonti.
No, which means I'm too small for this, but you are not. I think katonti, we are too small to carry it with you.
I will do it with enormous pleasure, but I cannot speak here of very personal, private things, but I would like us to remember the Jews of Vilna. It was a fantastic community. It was an entire world. It was, you had there religious Jews, you had secular Jews, you had communists, you had revisionists, you had really the structure of a community, and they all lived somehow together without killing each other. Maybe I have this My eyes become wet, I think. So let me lit quickly the candle. Yeah. The lit candle reminds me the candle that my mother, who never went to a shul, was always having lit on Yom Kippur, which was the day that her mother and my father's mother, who lived together in the small ghetto in Vilna, were taken out from the shul on Yom Kippur and brought to Ponari, where they were killed and thrown into the mass grave. So I could not think of them and think of the thousands of people who were machine gunned and thrown into these graves, and then by people who had to take them out from the graves and burn them. Well, but let us not forget that we live in a world in which such things go on. They go on everywhere, in China, in Pakistan, in Palestine, and I mean, these things go on, and man who does not learn from his mistakes is condemned to repeat them, and this is what happens.
And this is what happens, and this is also, what do you rebuild out of those ashes? It doesn't mean that they're losses that we want to sustain. No, we don't want those things to happen.
No, we don't want. We must learn. We must learn from our mistakes. We must learn from our mistakes. And there are proofs. I mean, there are very short periods of human history which are nice, and they have to serve us as an example that man is also capable of doing something positive. And let us hope, because without the principle of hope, there is no possibility of life now. And I'm speaking as someone who had a lot of luck in his life. A lot. I'm not speaking of surviving. I mean, this already was something that is in itself separate. But then creating an art that speaks to so many people from such very different areas. I mean, can you imagine that for my 90th, I received a gift here, a package of drawings made in the Samuel Bak Museum by Ukrainian children for me, as a thanks for the day that they spent in the museum dedicated to my art. I opened this package and I cried. Ukrainian children who have lost their families, fathers, and their homes.
You have to be able to find the hope.
Absolutely. Even among the ruins.
Especially. Yes. Especially among the ruins.
Absolutely. And how nice it is to find it in the Vilna Shul.
Well, the Vilna Shul is very privileged to have you to be a part of our extended family.
Thank you.
And really privileged to be able to do a little bit of remembering with you today, not only of your own experiences, but of all of those Jews of Vilna who didn't get to tell the story in the way that you get to.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.